Imagine going bankrupt. You'd probably lose your house, your car, maybe everything you own. A business goes bankrupt and it's game over. Doors shut, workers laid off, assets sold to the highest bidder. But what about an entire country? You've probably seen the headlines. The country is drowned in debt, yet somehow it keeps borrowing and borrowing and borrowing some more. So what actually happens when a government runs out of money and simply can't pay what it owes? Here's the strange part. You don't see the country get infected. There's no closed for business sign on the border. The country's still there. People still go to work and life goes on. So how does that work exactly? In this video, we are diving into what a country's bankruptcy or default really means, and why countries fall into it, what actually happens when they do, and whether they can ever bounce back. And yes, even rich countries can default too. Now, let's get into it. When people say a country is bankrupt, what they usually mean is actually called a default. A default is when a country misses a debt payment, delays it, or flat out say it won't pay it at all. But here's the thing, unlike businesses or people, countries don't go to bankruptcy court. There's no legal processes, no judge, and definitely no one showing up to repossess the government's office or furniture. The country's still there, and people still live their lives. The presidents still go on TV like nothing has happened. So what actually collapses? It's not the country itself, it's the trust. Investors and lenders simply stop believing the government can pay back what it owes. And once that trust is gone, everything gets harder. Borrowing money becomes a struggle. Importing essentials like fuel or medicine gets tougher too. Sometimes, the country even has to hand over control of its own assets just to stay afloat. It's like when Sri Lanka leased its port to China back in 2017 after struggling to repay project loans. To be fair, Sri Lanka's case was tied to one specific loan, and not a full country-wide default. But in theory, similar deals can happen after real sovereign defaults too. So here's the bottom line. The country's default doesn't mean the nation disappears. It means the world's confidence in that country disappears. And once that's gone, everything else gets a whole lot harder too. As most of you probably guessed, corruption and mismanagement are big reasons why countries end up defaulting. But that's only part of the story, and there's more going on beneath the surface. The first problem is simple too, is when governments borrow more than they can actually handle. And when they can't pay off that debt, you'll get a default. This usually starts when a country takes out loan after loan too quickly. At first, everything seems fine. Payments get made on time. But interest quietly piles up in the background, compounding months after months. Eventually, a massive chunk of the national budget goes straight into servicing the debt, leaving almost nothing for anything else. This is called a debt trap, and it turns into a vicious cycle of robbing Peter to pay Paul, borrowing new money just to pay off the old debt, over and over, until no one's willing to lend anymore. The second factor is when a country's currency loses its value. Things get messy fast when countries borrow in foreign currencies, especially US dollars. Which is extremely common since the US dollar is the world's reserve currency. But here's the problem. The government earns money in their own local currency, but owe debt in the US dollars. So when their currency weakens, they suddenly need way more of it just to buy the same amount of US dollars. Sometimes it's simply bad luck. It could be a war, a pandemic, or a crash in a country's main export. An example is Venezuela. Venezuela leaned almost entirely on oil. And when oil prices collapsed, so did the government's income. And add in sanctions and mismanagement, and the country resorted to print money, which triggered hyperinflation and his eventual default. And then there's political chaos. Governments change and priorities shift. In 2008, Ecuador's president, Rafael Correa, called part of the country's debt illegitimate and defaulted on purpose. Not because the money wasn't there, but simply he refused to pay. When a country defaults, it doesn't always start with a bang. Sometimes it's something small, like a missed payment or a request to delay interest. But even that tiny slip is enough to send a message, the message that something is wrong. Once that news gets out, credit rating agencies move fast. They downgrade the country's score, basically flashing a warning sign that says, this government can't be trusted to pay on time. If the card is sharp enough, investors panic, and they start pulling their money out fast. Currencies, bonds, stocks, anything tied to the country will fall. This is because when everyone rushes for the exit at once, they end up racing each other to sell, which drives the currency's value down hard. That's when imports gets brutal. Oil, food, medicine, most of it has to be paid in foreign currency. But now, it takes way more of the local money just to buy the same amount of US dollars. Shortages hit, prices spike, and inflation kicks in fast. Shelves empty out, and power cuts become the new normal. As prices spiral downwards, people scramble for cash, some fearing frozen accounts, others just panicking their savings will vanish. So they rush to the banks, but the banks don't have enough to give everyone, triggering the bank run. Some banks will freeze withdrawals, some banks will collapse, and once one bank falls, fear spread to the next, and the next, like dominoes, tipping over one by one. Businesses can't get loans, factories shut down, and workers lose their jobs. The real economy starts crumbling. And who feels this the worst? It's the regular people. So they protest, some riot, and the entire country spirals into chaos. That's exactly why countries fight so hard to avoid defaults, even when they are broke. Not because a judge is waiting to punish them, but because one missed payment can set off a chain reaction that wrecks the entire economy and shatters trust. Trust that can take decades to rebuild. So if a country defaults, is that the end of the story? No, not really. Some countries do bounce back, but the road is long and it's rarely painless. After a default, most governments get frozen out of normal borrowing because nobody wants to lend them anymore. Think of that one friend who's notorious for never paying people back, and now they're hitting you up for cash again. You're not lending them, and the same logic applies to lenders here as well. So the country usually has to restructure its debt first, asking for more time or even asking lenders to forgive part of what's owed. That's called a haircut, literally, and lenders absolutely hate it. But that's rarely enough on its own, so organizations step in. For example, the International Monetary Fund's IMF hands out emergency loans. The World Bank funds long-term development projects, and the Paris Club, a group of wealthy governments, offer to delay or restructure payments. But this rescue isn't free. It comes with strings attached, which may be raising taxes, slash spending, or sell off state assets like airports or oil companies. To locals, it can feel like handing over the country's pride, almost like a modern form of colonization. Jobs get cut, subsidies disappear, and prices climb even higher. And beyond the money, there's trust to rebuild. It takes years to convince investors to come back, to prove the country has changed for good. Kind of like that broke friend trying to show he's finally turned things around. Still, some countries pull it off. Like Argentina keeps defaulting, yet somehow keeps borrowing again. Greece clawed its way back after years of brutal reforms. Sri Lanka struck a deal with the IMF after its 2022 default, and it's slowly recovering now. And Uruguay might be the ultimate comeback story, surviving the brutal 2002 banking crisis to become one of South America's most trusted economies. So yes, a country can recover, but just don't expect it to happen fast or easily.